Broadcasting live from the studios of TV Free Baltimore. This is Speak Your Mind TV.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another excellent episode of Speak Your Mind TV. Today, we're going to talk a lot about what's happening this major political season in Maryland. I have with me, as always, my co-host, Cole Collins.
Good afternoon.
Today, since there's so much going on in the state of Maryland, Cole and I, we're gonna cover a lot of it. It's happening so fast, it's just getting kicked off, but it seems to be heated up already between all parties, Democratic and the Republican Party and everything in between. So I'm gonna talk to Cole today. Cole's got some thoughts, some pretty intricate facts that he'd like to provide to the conversation. So, Cole?
Well, I'm not sure they're really facts as much as they are observations from 25 years of working in and around the Maryland political environment. Not 100% of my time, but over a lengthy enough period of time that I could notice some trends happening. And so, like I said, not facts, but more observations. And we are in a very kind of antagonistic political climate right now. If you go online, you just see things seem to have broken down, totally degraded between left and right, Republicans and Democrats. It seems like the whole system is falling apart. And we had a very surprising result in the 2016 election where we have the President Trump with no prior political experience who beat an established candidate, and people are like, well, what's going on? Why is everybody so pissed off at each other is basically what it comes down to. And I noticed something when I first started as an intern in the Maryland General Assembly. I think it was 1994, so I was 22 years old. So we're talking going on almost 25 years ago. Young, fresh-faced. I was still in college at the time, and the individuals, the leadership of the state of Maryland at that time were all, there were a lot of veterans in them, and World War II vets, Korean War vets. They were, and of course Vietnam veterans who were now leadership in the state Senate and the House of Delegates. Louis Goldstein, for example, that was, I think, the last time he ever ran was in 1994. He was, as an example of the generation that these people came from, he had been elected as a state delegate from the Eastern Shore in like 1938 or something, served a couple terms, and then, Pearl Harbor's attacked. Louis Goldstein was a man who quit his job, a comfortable job as a state delegate, so that he could volunteer as a private in the U.S. Marine Corps and fight in the Pacific War. Now, how many people would do that today? And so you're talking about a generation of individuals who, regardless if they considered themselves Republicans or Democrats,
they cared about
democracy. They understood where they came from, and this was evident. I noticed way back then that no matter what side of the political coin was on, the leadership was on, all of the leaders had an understanding or respect for the basic democratic process. They knew these were guys who had fought fascism and communism, and they knew that above all, despite their political differences, that they were in a democratic system that they had fought, and many of them almost died for, and they all knew that they had to respect the democratic process above.
We don't have that anymore, is what you're saying, or you're alluding to.
Yeah, things changed, and that's kind of the point I'm moving to. In fact, I remember the guy who I worked for was a Marine in the Korean War. The guy who was the Baltimore City State Senator, and I wish I could remember his name. I think he probably passed away. Liberal Democrat who was also a Korean War veteran and who actually earned a combat commission in the Korean War, which if you know anything about how commissions are awarded, it's an exceptionally rare honor for that. So despite the fact that they were on opposite ends of the political spectrum, they both still had that respect for democracy. So I was in there in 94, 95. Then the leadership started dying off. And towards about, I began to notice in the late 90s, the leadership started to, not all at once, of course, but they started to transfer over to the younger people, the younger generation, the baby boomer generation. They went from the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw would say, and the leadership started to shift to the baby boomer generation. And that is when I started to notice the shift to ideologies.
Well, it was inevitable as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can't, you can't keep people alive forever. But each of us, we're individuals, but we're a product. We're influenced by the generation that we grew up in. Like we're Generation Xers, so we do certain things. Like as the media would tell you, we put our personal lives over our careers, for example. Which is true. I do that. My kids, my wife, they come first versus my career. And so the baby boomer generation started they started coming into into leadership positions, and that is when I kind of started noticing a change. I didn't notice it at first. It had to go a couple of years so that I could look back on it and be like, hey, wait a minute, something's up here. But I noticed on the national side, George W. Bush was elected in 2000. 2000. Yeah, it was 2000. They had the Gore Bush thing, the Florida thing, the hanging chads and everything.
That was major during that time period.
Yeah, he started out as, he started out kind of like a more moderate Republican. A lot of them, they do. They start out kind of moderate. Obama started out moderate. But then I noticed that 9/11 comes along. And, then you have the Patriot Act. You've got the spying, that Edward Snowden, that you have that whole thing. You have a shift that is strongly away from, I guess, his original conservative values. Certainly not the values of his father, who, was also shot down in World War II. And did you know that, like George Bush Sr., he was, what is it, Cheney? Oh gosh, I made fun for screwing up the name, but he was on a mission with like 8 or 9 other pilots. He was a carrier pilot. All the other guys got shot down. He was the only one to survive. All of his comrades were taken prisoner. Those who survived and were literally eaten by the Japanese on the island that they were taken to.
I never heard that about George Bush.
Yeah, there's a picture of him being picked up by the submarine. He was the only survivor of that. So. Now, granted, George Bush Sr., he had the, political, you're never going to agree with everybody. In fact, the first guy I ever worked for in the state Senate, Senator John Cade, who Route 97, I-97 is named after. So every time I pass the sign, I go, "Good morning, sir." As I drive down. I've been doing it for like 20 years. "Good morning, sir." Right. So George W. Bush went way away from the personal liberty side, up almost to what they used to generally call it. They used to be called fascism up until World War II, and then the fascists became the Nazis, and the communists became, the leftists and rightists. But generally, everything used to be called fascism. Nowadays, they just call it statism, because since World War II, fascism has been seen as a right-wing thing. But
why is it such a bad name? You always hear you fascist this, you fascist that. I mean, it's
fascism, communism, statism is the word. It's like it basically comes down to, who do you want to be in control? Do you feel that people can be in control of themselves, make their own decisions, or do you feel that somebody else needs to
decisions for
you to do it?
Which is what communism is, right?
Communism and fascism, and even the founding fathers had that issue. Thomas Jefferson, He was very much, everyone, common man can do anything. Alexander Hamilton was, no, we need an elite who can make more decisions for people. So you've always had this.
For all of us.
Yeah, you have always had this dichotomy in thought. Some people believe that people can make their own decisions better, and some people believe that they or somebody else can make decisions better.
What about big business? Like communism kind of stems from making decisions for everybody. But the big corporations.
Oh, now you're talking about like the capitalism versus the Marxism sort of
well,
thing.
I'm just I'm asking you because it's not often you run into somebody that can actually help answer these questions for you.
It's kind of funny because you have a situation where the businesses want to make decisions. Basically, there are two types of people in the world: people who just want to control their own lives, and people who want to control the lives of other people. Mm-hmm. And they will. So that's what it comes down to.
Okay.
So generally,
I agree.
And
it's just good to hear it sometimes.
Right. Now you have people. You have from these two groups of people. Some of them, for some reason, decide they want to be Republicans. Some of the other people, who are the individualists, feel that whatever it is in the Democratic Party is good for them. So it mixes. So whenever I hear, whenever I hear generalizations being made about political parties, I always kind of take it with a grain of salt, because although the leadership might be generalized and they might have their own kind of ideas, not everyone underneath agrees. And now, depending on who you have,
in those respective parties, it's not everybody in the party. Everybody's trying to generalize the party, but the individuals within the party don't all agree.
And then, of course, you've got their mouthpieces, like the Republicans would have Fox News always pointing at the bad side of the Democrats. The Democrats have CNN, MSNBC, always pointing at the bad side. So they try to frame each other. Right. And I really think people are kind of wising up to this.
I think so too.
And I really think that's where we're seeing a lot of the. I really think it's the internet that has given us so much information and so many different points of view now.
6 corporations that run.
That people are beginning to realize, wait a minute, this isn't all cut and dry. What's happening is, what it comes down to is, you have people who want to control their own lives. You have people who want to control other people's lives, And so I think generally that's where our society is. We're starting to have that kind of realization, which isn't anything new. This has been the way it has been throughout history. Now, the people who want to control their own lives, we call them individualists. We call them small d Democrats, small r Republicans. The people who want to control other people's lives, we used to call them all fascists prior to World War II, when fascism was kind of identified with the right. And then past World War II, we'd call them fascists on the right and communists on the left. But in general, they're the same group of people. They all want to control each other's lives. Now, the main difference between what we consider to be the fascists and the communists are, this is the idea of nationalism. Fascism is, our nation, a nation being a group of people with a common language, culture, traditions. Like our nation, the group we were born into, is the greatest, and everyone has to respect this nation. That's basically what fascism is.
It used to be like that, but from what I'm gathering, and just to your point, I'm just adding to your point, really, is for some reason now it seems like overall the media is, maybe not just the media, but it seems like society's trying to make us want to not feel so great about being American. It's almost one of those things where
now,
where we were real patriotic before.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden it's like, we're Americans. We're not the
right,
greatest,
right.
and let's find some dirt on us.
Why
I
can
are we
get
trying
to that.
find so much dirt
So
on us?
that's definitely in the line with the point I'm making. It's like you're saying we're having a shift in media saying, nationalism is bad, and nationalism is what basically caused every war for the last 2,000 years. So nationalism by itself is not really, really good. It's basically it's tribal warfare on a huge scale. That's what nationalism is.
Okay,
Now,
understood.
now on the opposite side, now we can say that's fascism. The nationalists. The other side are the internationalists. They are the Marxists, the socialists, the communists, the ones who believe that that the world is a global environment and not a national environment. Now, that's a very dangerous idea to the fascists. Now, if you are a fascist and somebody in your group says, we're not the best, these other people are just as good as we are, what's that going to do to your political ideology that says, oh no, our nation is the best? That's going to put a fracture in it.
Yes, it
That's a dangerous idea. Now, likewise, on the internationalist side, on the leftist side, it's a dangerous idea to say that any one nation is better than another when you're trying to get people from all different nations. What they call it globalism. It's globalism is what it is. So on the left, you've got the globalists. On the right, you have the nationalists. And because that is why they are always at odds. Where was it? Was it in Charlotte last August? Charlottesville? Was it Charlottesville or
I think
Virginia?
It was Charlottesville.
Right.
You're talking about the school shooting?
Not the school. It's when you had a bunch of neo-Nazis, fascists on one side.
When they all congregated.
You had a riot,
okay,
basically.
You had
Then you had Antifa,
rioting.
who are the communists, on the other side. You get these two guys together, and they're always beating the hell out of each other. In fact, you know what the biggest war in history was, in human history, in terms of just human lives lost, was the Eastern Front by itself in World War II, where you had Nazi Germany against communist Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. It was a massive war of extermination on both sides because that's the ideologies that they were fighting for. Now, the thing about fascism is you have a group of people who are only interested in their national identity. They're not going to step outside of that box too much because, let's say, we're Americans. How interested are we in running over and taking over Mexico, for example? No, that's Mexicans. You can say, the neo-Nazi would say, we don't want Mexico because it's filled with Mexicans. They're different than we are. They're a different nation.
So they're not concerned about that piece of land.
They don't care unless they're
sovereignty over there.
Yeah, well, in a nominal way, they're not concerned about it. But at the same time,
but they still don't like.
They don't like it. They don't want.
Ethnicity.
Yeah, they're like, okay, you guys stay where you are. Mm-hmm. We'll stay where we are. We'll put up a huge fence, and you don't go to us, and we don't go over to you, and everything's fine. Now, that's not going to fly with the internationalists on the left who believe that all races, everybody should be mixing together, which is fine. The idea is that. Their idea is that everybody needs to be under one big group where we can control them, and the idea of internationalism allows them to do that. That to achieve that globalism, and we'll do the titular one world government, and everyone's going to be happy.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Which on the right side are like, oh gosh, and that's one of the reasons why you see that hardcore fundamentalist Christians usually align to the far right, because once you start talking about globalism and one world governments, they're like, there's Revelations, it's the end of the world. Yep. That's Satan on the other side. Yep. So we all carry our baggage with us when we make our.
It makes total sense, though.
Yeah.
It makes. I mean, when you put it like that,
right?
It's how would you or how should you even expect everybody to agree with that? Like it's. Mm-hmm. There's no one. It doesn't seem like one side has it all figured out.
Nobody has it all figured out.
In their logic theory of what they're supporting.
And any rational individual is going to say there are times when you need to be an individual.
That's the balance. That's the balance.
There are issues. There are issues that should be decided by the individual. There are issues that should be decided by the group. Mm-hmm. The question is always how much of one, how much of the other. And the greatest generation that I initially started working under understood that, and they would try to talk these things through, But then we started getting in the early 2000s, I noticed a change in attitude that became more ideological. George Bush went far right, and if it wasn't for George Bush, you wouldn't have had Barack Obama elected, because as you recall, I would say probably towards about 2003, he just really started going like far right. Like I was kind of shocked when he wanted to introduce a constitutional amendment like outlawing gay marriage. I'm like, why would you even?
I actually remember that.
Yeah, it's like I was like, why would you do something like this? But I think the positive thing to that discussion was it forced people into a discussion to think, well, how bad is gay marriage really? One, it's like, does it affect me?
Right.
Does it, is it affecting anyone I know? Is it hurting? And America came back and we decided, because the issue was forced on us, we were forced to think about it.
To rebel against it.
Yeah, we were like, well, that's kind of a dumb idea. These guys, gays, lesbians, they have been out in society forever.
Since the beginning of society.
Since the beginning of society, they've always been here. They don't hurt anybody, and then everyone started realizing, hey, wait a minute, that guy I knew who never got married, oh, I see, maybe he's gay. Maybe he's gay. Those two women who we used to call spinsters who lived together, oh, that's what's happening. We just never talked about it as a society. So, it kind of blew up in their faces.
We took a realistic approach to it. I think I heard a couple jokes, like one being, well, all those gays and lesbians, they should end up, let them get married. They should find out just how miserable it is, just like I am. Try to find
Be careful what you wish for.
A humor approach.
Now, I will say that my wife is a lovely, beautiful woman. I'm so happy to be married to her, and if it wasn't for her, I'd be drunk in an alley right now.
Right.
And that's probably not too far from the truth.
Yeah,
actually,
and it settles you down. I realized, being a married man myself, it settled me down. All that finding the need to mingle and to get out there and search for a new relationship. It all went away.
You know who else? Now we're getting kind of off the topic here, but to that there's a famous event that happened in early Roman history. Now the event is called they call it the rape of the Sabine women. Now the word rape originally meant to seize, so and when you're talking about an event in antiquity using the word rape, it means seizure, which now you can see where it would apply.
It was a common word. Right. We're going to go in and we're going to rape them for all their jewels course, and their gold.
We understand it to mean violent sexual assault.
Now it's sexual assault.
Right. But the event through antiquity was always referred to as the rape of the Sabine women, and what this was it was an event where the men in Rome realized that they had far too many men and not enough women to calm down the men, and in order to calm down the men, they needed women. So they invited a neighboring city-state, it was like Saba or something, or Sabine, whatever, I forget what it was, and they invited all of the men and women into a stadium, got everyone drunk, and then killed all the men and took the women. So yeah, it was a different time.
It was a different time.
It was a different time back then, right? Thankfully, we don't do that thing anymore.
Not as much policing and
things were a little different back then.
Government.
But yeah, that's anyway. Right, exactly.
But see, that's the whole point. That's the whole.
The whole point is
governing and policing is to minimize that, because if you don't have that kind of system in place, you have anarchy. You know, it's everybody's running around doing what they want to do, and there's no safety.
Yeah.
How safe? Well, I mean, every place would be like the inner city of Baltimore.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah, that's why you need a. Every guy needs to get married so to calm them down. You know, and there's a reason why in the Middle Ages, the most powerful piece on a chessboard is the queen.
Yep.
And that's the reason, because the king might have all the power, but the king is listening to his wife.
Right.
Because the wife tells him what to do, and that's why the queen's the most powerful piece on the chessboard.
That's how it is in my relationship.
Yeah. Well.
And there's no jokes there either.
Yeah, no joke there. Exactly. probably for good reason,
Yeah,
because he
I
would
agree.
be at the bar across the street if that wasn't the case.
Absolutely.
So okay, so anyway, this all comes down to we had as the baby boomer generation started coming in, I began to notice there was a. I was like, wow, George W. Bush started out kind of moderate right, and wow, he went far right. Then you have Barack Obama coming in, and he started out as moderate left, but then the first thing he saw is that you've had all these Obamacare. I'm a healthcare expert, right? And which to me, when I saw how they were passing the law and what was in it, I was like, what in God's name are they doing? This thing's gonna be an absolute disaster. Why are they doing this? And I thought to myself, wait a minute. After seeing this and other things and some of the far left policies that Obama put in and the far right policies that Bush had put in, and things are swinging back and forth, I was thinking, I'm not sure. I mean, granted, there's always this kind of reactionary attitude towards the parties. You do one thing to the extreme, I'm going to do something to the other extreme.
To try to counteract it.
Right. I mean, that's kind of that swing back and forth. But I was like, well, these baby boomer politicians, they were raised, they were educated in the 60s and 70s under professors who told them, who told them that they had who told them that they can make a difference in the world, which is great. Everyone should make a difference in the world, but it's
also a cliche. But.
Yeah, it's a cliche. It's like some things you don't want to touch, But so you have a generation of politicians who came in thinking, I need to change things, even if they're fine, because maybe they're not fine. People, they started pursuing a more ideological tact than the previous greatest generation. So now you've got people aligning to the right who are very ideological. The leadership, you have people aligning to the left who are very ideological. Like on the right, Patriot Act, for example. Could you imagine 20 years ago being told that the Republican Party was going to pass a law that said that they can spy on everything, and then you've got like Obamacare, for example.
You would have felt like your privacy would have been invaded by
right.
someone.
It's like you have these huge ideological swings, and then meanwhile you've got the rise of the internet, where suddenly mass media, traditional mass media, they're not in control anymore. You can if you want perspectives on the National Defense Authorization Act, again, another Republican thing that allows you to be arrested and put and detained without any trial, against due process. You can look up various hundreds of different sources to give you different perspectives, different views, different ideas about pros and cons, yeses and nos, that the mainstream, that Fox News and CNN will never give you. So suddenly the mainstream Americans, we are beginning to understand these issues as not just Democrat and Republican. We are beginning to understand these issues as individualist versus statist, and where's the balance between these issues?
That's a common theme. I wanted to jump in right there because you touch on a good point, and I've been hearing it lately in separate interviews I've heard. Tony Campbell mentioned it. Liz Murtori, she mentioned it as well in her interview. That's what it seems like people are starting to do now. Probably on a national level, but since we live here in Maryland, we're noticing it here. People are starting to notice the individuals a little bit more than the parties, and that's one of the main reasons somebody like Donald Trump got elected.
Yeah, and it should be remembered that Donald Trump wasn't elected because he was the best candidate and he had the best ideas. Donald Trump got elected because he was not one of the established Republicans or Democrats.
Broadcasting live from the studios of TV Free Baltimore. This is Speak Your Mind TV.